out of reach.
That's how we went to the moon.
We did something that was impossible. That's right. Interestingly enough, on the topic of flight, my lesson in impossible came from the conversation I had with Richard Bach. And I actually, if you go to my web page or my Facebook page, either one, there's an audio that you can download. It's about 20 minutes, and it goes through the 5 elements in the story. And it was my first work that I did around this. And I've included the clip from my audio with Richard Bach telling this story. And he tells it, of course, much better than I do. It's his story, and he's a better storyteller. But at the very end of our dialogue, when we were talking about the fact that I learned from him that first element, of course, I didn't know that these were the elements then, but I learned from him that I was in control. I said, just on a whim, and we were really out of time, but I said, do you remember when you learned that? Do you remember when you realized that you were in control of your destiny, that you were in control of your story, and you were in control of your happiness? He thought about it for a minute, and he said, you know, I'd always been fascinated with flight. I was obsessed with flight, but I knew I would never be, I would never fly. I would never be a pilot because I wasn't superhuman. And I knew from the media that pilots were perfect in all respects. They had attributes I didn't have. So even though he was obsessed with flight, he knew he would never fly. But then he actually said to someone who was a flight instructor, he said, if I wash and polish your plane, will you give me 50 minutes of flight instruction? I don't know if he knew what he was getting himself in for, but the guy said, sure. And the next thing he knew, he was in the air. And then eventually he was at the controls. And that became for him the analogy for his entire life. I'm in control of my plane. Nobody gets to tell me how to write the story or what flight path to choose. Do you have an analogy for being in control? His analogy before, his story before was, I will never fly because I'm not perfect and I'm not superhuman. Well, you know what? I'm not perfect and I'm not superhuman. And if anybody out there is perfect or superhuman, please don't tell me because I'd hate to be intimidated. And yet we do the impossible all the time. I've talked about stratospheric success. Do you know my definition of stratospheric? Stratospheric to me is whatever seems out of reach today.